and welcome to Emerald Meadows, your one-stop channel for all things RC and sometimes quilting. Today we're going to be talking about the Hobby King, the Turnigy flight controller, the T1000 Fc flight controller that I use in my Bixler FPV. We're not going to be talking about the FPV today. I mean, we may. I think I have other videos that explain a lot of this. But today I want to talk about the Turnigy T1000 Fc. I installed this in my FPV machine to have basically a return to home function, and I have to tell you, I'm very impressed with this product. I am more than pleased. I mean, I know a few other people in our club that have other products that work, but I'm not sure if they give you the confidence that when you're using the product that your plane's actually going to be coming home. But I have to tell you, with this product, I'm very happy, and we're going to be talking in some details as to how that is programmed. So let's get started. We're going to go into some close-up views of to how it looks in the machine, and then I'll talk about how I set up my system. So let's get started. Okay, let's open up the box and take a look at how I've installed the TF1000 FC. And you can see the very first thing is that the three set screws here, those need to be pointed towards the front of the aircraft. Notice I put a little white dot there. That's just to remind me that this is the orientation, that it must always point towards the front of the plane. And we're going to talk about the three set screws, which is the rudder and the elevator and the ailerons, and they go from positive to negative. So there's no reversing dip switch on this. You simply turn that dial, and at some point, at the midpoint, the actual control surface will change directions. So it's actually convenient that way. You can dial as little as or as much as you want, but it's very, very convenient. And these are the two dip switches that are needed for doing the settings. If you take a look at the manual, you'll find that I have this in a configuration for an aircraft, but there's other settings in the manual that will set it up for a VTAL, and there's one other. So this is the settings, but also this is a location where you set your home, field for your return to home. Notice that right here there's a little hole called set. This is where you're actually going to set your return to home. This is where the aircraft will return to. Now, when you do it, you must turn these two dip switches down, okay? In the down position. I call it the down position. It's opposite of whatever the winged aircraft position is. I push those down, and then what I do is you press, you put in a small screwdriver and push down on the button that's inside the set hole. Now you must hold this down until the green light becomes a solid, but even then I held it down for a few more minutes, for a full minute, just to make sure that my GPS has been acquired. It will actually, I found that it would actually go through and the lights would actually become solid to say that you've set your home field, but the GPS wasn't acquired yet, so it didn't work, so it kept going back to wherever I had set it before. So give it a few minutes when you powered it on. Make sure that your GPS has acquired its signal, and then with your dip switches down, press the set switch, hold it until it becomes a solid, and you've done it for long enough to make sure that you've acquired the GPS setting. Now, connect the battery, and then don't forget, and I've done this, to put your dip switches back or it won't work. So anyway, this is the basic setup that I have in this Bixler, and I have to tell you, this is a phenomenal device. It works really well. And we're going to talk a bit more about the different settings that you can have on your radio. So let's take a closer look now at the other side of the TF1000. This is your input and output. If you're like me, I tend to color code. I have so many wires, as you can see, it's like a nerve ganglia in here. I color code all of these because when they're tucked in the plane, you're never knowing where these wires are coming from. So I actually use a fabric marker to mark each of my connections here. And if you're like me, it says in and out, and I'm never quite sure if that's in from the receiver or in from the servos, or so. Just to clarify for this video, where it says in, this is in from the receiver, out goes out to the servos. And there is a special autopilot switch here, so you will need a spare 3-position switch. It can be done with a 2-position switch, but it is a bit awkward, and I would tend to think that try to make sure that you have a radio with a 3-position switch so you can use the autopilot that we're going to talk about next. It's really slick, but it's also a lot handier if you have a 3-position switch to put that in, and you must have a free channel to use it on. So this is what we have. The battery is not used. You don't need it because you're bringing in power from your 5 volts. And to be honest with you, I honestly don't know what the battery is there for, since you have power from these other cables coming from the receiver. So we have aileron in, elevator in, and rudder in, and the autopilot, and then aileron out, elevator out, and rudder out. And as before, we've discussed what these 3 buttons, these 3 potentiometers do, as well as what these dip switches do, and of course my mark for the front. Now let's talk about what are the 5 different configurations that you have for this device. Oh, and finally, one more thing. This is the autopilot plug. This configures. This will configure your return to home. Notice that I also put a plus on here, so I know where the plus and a minus on the bottom. Again, I'm fanatical. I always think that there's a potential for doing damage if we plug things in incorrectly. So the negatives are on the bottom, okay, or the non-label side, and the positive is on the label side. Okay, that's all the white connections. So I think that's everything to look at the details. I'll cram all of this back into the machine, and we'll talk about the settings on the radio. So the only thing we have to do now is we have to assign on the Turner G9XR and the Taranis, not so on the Spectrum models, but on these 2 models, you have to assign a channel for the 3-position switch for the return to home. And I'm going to be using the SB switch, and I'm just going to move over to the mix screen and go down, and it's currently on channel 7, and it is now, I've already have it programmed to SB on channel 7. There's no magic to there other than the fact you just need to set it on channel 7 to the SB switch so that you have it already programmed.
Altitude and attitude hold.
And I have it programmed now so that it tells me what flight mode I'm in.
Return to home.
So the very top when it's up is return to home.
Altitude and attitude hold.
Altitude and attitude hold is basically it flies level at that same altitude.
Leveling mode.
And leveling mode is simply won't allow the aircraft to go beyond 45 degrees on any bank, left or right, or forward or backwards. So it won't dive down more than or climb up more than on 45-degree angles. Quite handy. And we're going to talk
Altitude and
about,
attitude hold. Return to home.
these are the three settings that you have with the GPS installed. And when the GPS is not plugged in, you have leveling mode, you have no mode, it's simply just manual mode, and there's a 3D mode which will actually change your control surfaces very slowly for flying 3D. But since I'm only using this for my FPV, I have the three settings that are enabled when you plug in the GPS. So there's a total of 5 settings, 3 with the GPS plugged in, and 3 with the GPS is not plugged in. When the GPS is not plugged in, it's simply just a flight stabilizer. When you plug in the GPS, you have flight stabilization and return to home. I'm always going to use the return to home because that's one of the reasons I would buy one of those controllers. We've covered a lot talking about the TF1000 flight controller here. I have to tell you that I'm very impressed. I've flown this now since the beginning of the season for a couple of months, and it's dead on reliable. A lot of people think that I should have the flight controller and OSD all incorporated in my FPV plane, but I like the fact that that one component is reliable, and I'm going to do another video, part 2, and the one thing that this doesn't have is it doesn't have any control for throttle. For me, that's not a big issue because most of my planes, if I set my throttle to 50%, that's going to keep me up in the air no matter what plane I'm flying. But some of the more expensive flight controllers with return to home also control the throttle. This doesn't, but what it does do is very, very reliable. It will come back to your field. It won't land like it does on the video from Hobby King, but it definitely circles the field when I want to return to home. And the one thing I like for FPV is when you're in the altitude and attitude hold. That way you can set that switch on and you can look around and enjoy the view, and you don't have to worry about controlling your plane. It will fly at that same altitude and on that heading until you decide to turn around. So that's kind of a handy feature as well. The return to home, when turned on, like I said, is very reliable, but it has no throttle. And in the next video, we'll talk about how you incorporate the TF1000 Fc with the fail-safe on your fail-safe type receivers to give you the throttle capabilities should you need it. So thank you very much for listening to this video on the TF1000, a great product. As you can see, we've given you a little bit of a taste on how to install it and make it work. It's not difficult, and if you have an expensive model, I would highly recommend that you have one of these installed. So we'll see you next time at Emerald Meadows.